Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Canned with Tinnuts, a series that celebrates the launch of a new age IP firm, the namesake Tinnuts. We'll be starting our discussion in a few minutes. We're just waiting for all our streams to go live, reach out there. All right. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. However, you're connected today. If you're viewing us on Facebook, Instagram, or on Zoom, thank you for taking this time and tuning into this discussion. I have with me here today um, an old friend, a classmate, a colleague, um, and I think lastly in that progression, a stand-up comedian, the founder of Lasoon Live, ladies and gentlemen, Aakash Mehta.
How's it going? Hello.
Hey Akash, thank you for joining us today.
Not
I
at
think
all.
at some point we'll need you to warm up the audience. Uh, like you, I too have always fed off the audience, and in strange times, you kind of miss that feedback and that energy that builds from the other side of the room or that fourth wall. But yeah, we're here today. The session's called Jokes Apart, and we're exploring the one the
The
forgive me,
vulnerability.
forgive me, Akash. I didn't do my vocal exercises before this. It's been a
I
while.
still use the ones you taught me.
Yeah. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, Akash and I go way back. We studied in the same law school at Praveen Gandhi College of Law together, and we've since then. Um, I'd like to say I've written some jokes for him, although I did not write them. He just happened to take them from some performances of mine. But we
Oh,
studied.
oh, I see that already claims are being made.
And we will explore those claims further. um, but yeah, it's a fun example to go into, and we're exploring the vulnerabilities of intellectual property in stand-up comedy, and I thought it's a great conversation. You speak both languages. You speak the legalese. You speak.
I genuinely would like to put it out there that I have a law degree, but no, I wouldn't say I have an education in law.
That
Okay, so I mean, forgive me for my trespasses. because when I speak in legally, or rather when I try to talk about law, it gets I'm constantly. I mean, luckily I had an education, and I have friends like Rafael to go back to every now and then to ask questions. Uh, but yeah, it's confusing times we live in, my friend.
Yeah, and I mean, I I think before we really get into the intellectual property and the property part of it, I'd like to start at the thought level, the idea expression dichotomy, kind of get into what you're thinking when you begin to create a piece of work, a comedic work. So, Akash, if you can probably take us through how you think when you're trying to create a joke, a set, a punchline, a special. Take us through that process. Take us through how you go out and express, how you kind of execute, how you perform and offer that set or those services,
Hmm.
and in what form you do that.
My mother, who couldn't hear anything from outside, has come in.
Hello.
Uh, just give me 1 second. Huh? What is happening? Whose voice? Acha, you can't hear. You can't. Have you turned on the audio for the audience watching on Zoom?
I believe so.
You'll have to turn up your volume, ma. Everyone is adjusting to the technological problems.
I mean, yeah.
So yeah, comedians will be quick to tell you that comedy is a lifestyle.
Mhm,
It's a very objective art form in the sense that it expression is very easy to cast aside because it has a very clear objective of making people laugh. So a painting, say, for example, I always compare it between painting and pottery. Painting is pure expression. Anything can be a painting almost. You could draw. I mean, you could paint on a canvas on and you could chalk on a pavement, and both of them can be wonderful pieces of art. But pottery, if it doesn't hold water, it's not a pot. So comedy is a lot like that, because comedy needs to make them laugh. There have to be laughs, there have to be definitive jokes, there have to be that kind of restricts it from being a. It's almost like our approach is more often than not problem solving. It's almost more often than not explanations, not just to ourselves but to the audience while we're at it.
mhm,
Each joke is usually an exploration in that sense of a premise, and that becomes all consuming as a lifestyle. So you're always working, you're always observing, you're always a lot of people say when they talk to you for the first time, oh, I hope you don't make a comedy out of this, and they don't understand that it's not so much the specific instances but the overarching narratives that come out of them. The incident of a person giving me a joke is not so much important as the idea of somebody giving me a joke. I always tell my mom and dad, whatever I say about you in these jokes, I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm talking about an idea of you, which relates to a far larger audience. So it's
mhm,
a lot of it is about that. Joke writing itself, I mean, so that's where a lot of their observations come from. They come from real life things, and then you kind of try to build. Sometimes you'll observe something just once, and then you'll start walking around to your friends, and you'll be like, hey, hey, does this happen to you? Oh, has this happened? So there are a lot of ways to arrive at this observation, but the point is you try to find an overarching observation for society. Then you try to explore it. You try to take sides on it. You try to have an opinion on it. The best bits will always look at both sides of this, and we are talking bits here. I would like to make that differentiation also. A joke is a very small unit of what a bit becomes. A bit would be basically a lot of jokes about the same thing strung together. So a lot of jokes form a bit, a lot of bits form a set or two together form an act, or an hour or a special or whatever.
mhm,
So when you're another way of doing jokes is some I do a lot, and I attribute this to law school, is an argumentative joke where you start with an opinion as opposed to an observation, and then you take observations to support your opinion as it goes. So for example, I'll say something like, oh, ants are amazing. So my joke starts with, guys, ants are amazing, guys. and then I will justify why ants are amazing. It could be genuinely intellectual points. It could be anything. Right now, how you make it work, is how your jokes come out. And jokes in itself have a lot of components as well. So when you're looking at a joke, you're looking at a setup and a punchline. Jokes are like magic tricks. They're supposed to make you think that something goes somewhere else, and then something doesn't go that way at all. It's as simple as I always say: magicians are dumb comedians, because if they were smart enough, they wouldn't need little rubber balls. They would do it with their words. Uh, but
Oh, strong one, strong one.
no, I don't. I only mean that little bit.
Is it
Uh,
aside from all of that? I think could you address the? I think that one common instance or proverb, there is a bit of truth in every joke. Do you think that holds
Huh.
true?
In a sense, yeah, because it's always, see, every character in a joke is based on, like I said, those observations, those overarching narratives that we find in society. So if you look at a Bassi bit, for example, Bassi, who has become huge recently, a lot of his bits are about being in hostel, and the characters he's talking about are archetypes.
Mhm.
The stereotypes, right, of what a stoner guy in a hostel is like. Every stoner guy in hostel is like this guy. It's like a very complex set of observations arranged into characters and a story to make it very, very relatable and very funny at the same time.
Mhm.
um, so whenever you're writing these jokes, you're looking at it from a bunch of different perspectives. There's the writing itself, which in where we're talking about the structure of a joke. Jokes rely on certain tools to work. So to give you an example, a rule of three, setup, reaffirmation, and then a punchline. So you say something
Okay,
that
okay, okay.
hmm,
Hold on a second, Akash. Before you get into the rule of three, I can't stop myself from asking this question of. Uh, so you, I mean, if I can put it clearly, you mentioned that if I can put it into two buckets, you said argumentative kind of jokes and observational humor,
yeah.
right? Um, I think maybe we'll come back to the observational part, because that's where I feel um, you have questions of originality, and that's where I feel where a lot of that conflict will lie.
I
But
think that they come up irrespective, because there are so many different moving parts in a joke.
Mhm,
Rather, I would say there are so many static parts that a joke moves around to make itself funny, that those static parts get repeated a lot.
mhm,
To give you certain instances, some on what makes it difficult to understand when it comes to originality is on what level the thing might be stolen. If you have, say, for example, Dane Cook did a bit that Louis C.K. had done, or so was the claim. It's a very popular feud that happened abroad, and I don't think they ever went to court over it.
mhm.
Maybe they did. I don't know. I don't think they did. If they did, they must have settled, because the problem with these is it's so difficult to prove. So his joke
So,
has a structure, and Dane Cook's joke has the same. I mean, it's the same scaffolding. The words change, the names change,
yeah.
but the scaffolding is the same. So that is one very difficult level to actually find out whether or not the joke is stolen or not, because structures keep reappearing in art constantly. It's like saying, you played this sequence of chords, so it must be. It's like the blues. All blues songs have the same chords. Okay,
Yeah.
it's like the same chords every single time. So
So
at
for
what
our
level does
viewers,
it become?
Akash also is a, and I mean, like me, he wears many hats. Um, he's an audio engineer by qualification also, and
Yeah, yeah.
plays the ukulele and guitar and I think 12 other instruments very well there. So I'll take your word for it, Akash, when you say all all blues songs have the same chord structure. Um, but you mentioned the rule of three. Now, um, I'm pretty sure all our viewers, at least the legal ones, have gone through many books of jurisprudence, but I don't think they know what rule of three you're talking about. So maybe you can
So
elaborate.
yeah, so I will think of them as simple tools that you would use in a situation to make it funnier.
Mhm.
So a rule of three is, say, when you set forth an example. When I was a kid, I used to love all the things, that kids love doing. So I would start out with some kind of premise like that. So it sets up a image in your mind. Your small child, what would a small child? I used to love, popcorn and going on the merry-go-round, and killing squirrels. Oh, those memories. So whenever so what happened here is I set up something, then I gave you an example to set the tone of the kind of examples which would be coming at you, which is, say, popcorn. You reaffirmed it with the second thing, which is your merry-go-round or whatever, and then the third thing is a punchline, which is a misdirection, which is what all jokes need, and you gotta laugh out of it. Obviously this is a bad example, but I can give you a lot of other examples of these tools as well. So there's something as simple as a hyperbole. We've all done hyperbole. um, uh, your video isn't shut, so we can see you do vocal exercises. Uh, but hyperbole, as something as simple as, oh, I ate so much paneer makhani that day, I could have, filled the Heisenberg. Uh, or whatever, Rajma. Sorry, Rajma is the one where associated with gas, isn't it? Yes, that it is. Um, so now, see, what I did here was called a save line. When the joke you say didn't work, you flip it around, and then you make it sound like you're referring back to a memory. All of these are tools, they're tricks, they're essentially sleight of hand with words. So
Mhm.
as you grow as a comedian, you add more of these to your repertoire,
All right.
and you use them, you employ them in situations when you're writing jokes to make the joke work.
Mhm.
As time goes by, it becomes less about making jokes work and more about conveying information. All the pots hold water now. How do I make mine look like I made it?
Mhm.
Essentially, so that's where I think it becomes uh, again difficult to say where jokes come from. So when it comes to comedians, when there is a dispute about somebody stealing a joke, and there have been several,
Yeah.
there are several problems that tend to come into the way. In our situation in this country so far, I don't think there's been a single situation except for 2012, I would say. Maybe when did we start law school? 11.
We started in 11. Yeah, that's
So
right.
11 or 12, I think there was an incident.
Okay.
And after that, I don't think any comedian has ever been truly punished or ostracized or anything when it comes to stealing a joke. Because when it comes to stealing a joke, I think Indian comedy is in a place where uh, it's stuff that anybody could have thought of. I'll be honest with you. A lot of us write jokes on stuff that anybody could have written jokes on.
Mhm.
The more original you become, the harder it is to steal your jokes. Uh,
So sorry to interject there. So when you say original, um, I mean that's what I have the biggest problems, because um, I that originality is originality in terms of the selection and arrangement of punchlines, of bits put together one before the other, set up in sort of how you would plot on a screenplay or a script, a
It's difficult
graph.
because it's very dynamic. It
Mhm.
changes from night to night.
Yeah,
And that's another thing I would say you're missing out. It's not just the fact that it's the same script, it's not just the arrangement of words, but the acting out of the arrangement of words in a specific fashion, the specific performance of a script that
yeah.
must be done in that way for it to be funny. And I think that's where the two layers of originality come in.
Mhm.
One is to take things into places that nobody would have taken them into,
Mhm.
in terms of the thought and what you've written down. And the second is executing that thought and what you've written down in an act out, in an actual performance, which makes it your own. That those are the two levels of making something your own. So to give you an example, I put out a YouTube video. You can go check it out if you like. It's about road rash. Okay, it's about road rash and being in Gujarati medium school, because I was in Gujarati medium school for a while. Uh, and there's a break in that joke where I say something about it's a stupid joke about how as a child I used to think it was pronounced Napa Valley instead of Napa Valley.
Oh,
And I find Napa Valley as such a hilarious sounding set of words that I just go into this uh, I just keep saying Napa Vale again and again and again.
Mhm.
And so now nobody else would have done this in terms of execution, in terms of writing. It's something that I think I strongly feel that's a me joke. If anybody else were to do this kind of joke, it would not work. So
Got it.
which would
So
be a first level of discouraging. Sorry, a first level of a discouragement to whoever is thinking of stealing. The
okay.
problem happens when people steal jokes that are around this kind of thought.
Mhm. So what you're saying is that there is that originality in that delivery, which is what really makes it distinguishable, makes it um, kind of at a level you're also um, you're saying that uh, that delivery makes it enforceable also. Um,
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? Like it makes it uncopyable in a
okay.
sense. To do, okay, how do I put it? To do a
So
Seinfeld joke,
yeah.
the
So
way
let me come to
Seinfeld did
Seinfeld.
it.
Let me come to
Uh,
Seinfeld
huh.
because that's one of the examples that I had, and um, not of the show, but of of his foray in stand up. When so there is protection available, Akash. I think but why do comedians kind of choose that protection for some formats, or once that those bits or those sets or those specials reach the stage of a special, why the distinction? I mean, why don't you as a comedian write a script for I mean, you can change it around every show, but why isn't there a why don't you follow the process of putting down a script to every show, or a master show, or a theme, and then taking it from there on? And why do you wait to put certain amount of bits together, or a special together, or maybe a series together, um, to actually bring it down to a fixed format or a fixation of a script?
So a lot of us, I wouldn't say a lot of us. I would say a small. Firstly, see, we are myopic a little bit. Okay, comedians, we are busy writing jokes. We have things on our mind. We're quite occupied. So the idea of constantly copywriting something becomes cumbersome. The idea of paying someone to do it is something which is even more unnecessary seeming, because there seems to be an internal mechanism of, "Hey, तूने मेरा joke किया, stop doing my joke." Or I have personally been on a lot of a moderator on a lot of these. There's almost an, I wouldn't say arbitration, but a definite mediation system that is internal and inherent to the field.
Mhm.
There are not a lot of us. Everybody at least knows five people in common, and will at least not hate three of those five people in common. So that leaves you with two people. And of those two people, one of them might be an older, more senior, or whatever kind of seniority that people like to associate with one another. So there is always somebody to mediate. And personally, I've been on a lot of these. They always, almost always end on a basic, one comedian says, "Ha, theek hai, rakh le," whatever, and another comedian says, I mean, there is placating. And that, because see, jokes are a very, that's your rosy roti. You're going to keep writing more of them. I personally have had situations where people have taken my jokes, and it hasn't really made that much of a difference,
Mhm.
because it's more trouble than it's worth. Why? Because this is, I think, the second big reason. Uh, uh, the enforceability of anything seems very difficult in our country. Uh, you know me, I
So
to call and complain about this also. So
so
hmm.
exactly to that. So what you're saying is because of that um, kind of the mechanisms of reporting infringement or prosecuting on the basis of infringement uh, being tougher than most other environments or most other, I mean, judicial systems in other geographies. Um, is that probably why most of this is norms enforced? Do you see that as a reason as why comedians keep to that circle of influence to kind of enforce comedians who are ripping off others' jokes or misrepresenting others' jokes or
Yeah, it's
copying
also
delivery?
about, I mean, so, chalo, you get an injunction. Okay, I have every comedian meticulously tapes every performance.
Okay.
Okay, why do I not want that performance ka taping to be part of court evidence? I can only leave to your imagination.
Yeah.
So, firstly, that is a deterrent.
Hmm.
Secondly, another problem is ki, how do I put this? Say I get an injunction, okay, from High Court.
Hmm.
Ki, you cannot do my joke anymore. Now I have gone to some private party somewhere, wherever, and I do the joke I've been injuncted not to do. So then who's there to, there's no enforceability. There's no way of knowing. We are like, rats scurrying. Yeah, people do five shows in a night. Who will keep track?
Well, traditionally, I would suggest. I mean, it is infringement is a criminal offense, and I would suggest the use of the local police and the local police chowki or
Yeah,
police
but see,
station.
that's the thing, right? Like,
But y'all are not friends of the police for some reason.
uh, for some reason.
Yeah.
No, and it's just, yeah, because you don't want to. I mean, that is the quintessential, we have an internal mechanism to deal with a lot of these problems, and I am first to admit it's very bonkers.
Hmm.
But when it comes to joke stealing, it's very civil. Sometimes it is not civil, but at most it is just, whatever. People will sit and call 10 people, will like, "Arey yaar, ye sala aisa hai and waisa hai," and expletives are thrown, and
Hmm.
it's dealt with in some way or another. So the thing is, the current, and it's never going to be economic. The thing is, when your scene is only 250, 300 working comedians, you're not very inclined to ruin any relationships, because you might be frustrated with someone today, but tomorrow, Netflix calls both of you on for a lineup, or both of you on to write on a show, or one of your pilots gets picked up and you need the other. So it's such a small community that nobody wants to, above all, hurt feelings.
Hmm. So you mentioned earlier about I think an incident back in 2012 that really got I mean people going or thinking about it, which was the real incident that I mean a landmark case um, in comedic circles. Is that something that you can discuss for
I
everyone?
mean, I don't think it's worth discussing, because it was born more out of bullying than anything else.
Okay.
So it didn't really, I mean, if there was any shred of legal integrity in the entire thing, then I would have gone directly into it. It was more of just some comedian getting bullied by a bunch of others for something that everybody was guilty of in that time.
So let me ask you this then, Akash, because uh, I guess you've as comedians you'll have come up through some kind of system of norms for enforcement and to prevent kind of infringement, whether that's calling out someone
Hmm.
socially on WhatsApp or kind of giving them a bad name in social circles um, offline. Do you is there some kind of uh, circle of influence above that or architecture of influence above that that kind of stops them at a level where they promoters won't book them, agents won't touch them? Has it reached that point, or are we yet to
We have reached that point in the past. I feel that we most certainly have, but internally, I think that this was something that was brought out very nicely, I think, in a New York Times podcast,
Mhm.
when Louis C.K. had been banned from virtually everywhere after about, I think, 6, 8 months of that, or a year or something of that. He had gone on stage at a club in New York. So they were interviewing the club owner, and the club owner made a good point, in my opinion. He said, if this guy is banned for something that he's not tried for criminally and does not go to jail for, then how long does he have to be banned? Because if somebody makes a living telling jokes, you can't take away their livelihood from them.
Mhm.
That's a constitutional offense.
Wow.
So even after Me Too in India, so Chakrabarti was banned from a lot of places for a while, and then when he came out a year after, all misgivings, or all thoughts about what happened in that scenario and whether or not he was framed aside, the fact is that how long do you keep somebody out of work? How long? You can't make them starve to death, right? And I think in that sense, obviously this is way higher in the hierarchy of seriousness, but joke stealing for us is not nearly as bad as that, and that gets dealt with. You might miss out on a few spots here and there, a few lineups. There is a way to correct behavior a little bit.
Got got it. What about when this material and these jokes are used in formats outside of stand-up comedy, um, or the
That's
traditional?
another interesting thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, now, to give you an example, I've been doing a joke for a while.
Mhm.
I think maybe it's been some 3.5 years in the making.
Okay.
And piece by piece, one observation here, one thought here, one angle here, just trying to do things, taking my time with it. I released that joke on my website recently.
Mhm.
So I have a subscription model on my website. That's one place where I wish I had enforceability and traceability. People stealing my special and then putting it on torrents. But anyway, so when I put it out, and then after this lockdown, I was just going through my stuff, just books and all, and I found this old Calvin and Hobbes comic,
Mhm.
and it had an observation which was so close to. I mean, one of the observations which was the same in the joke.
Mhm.
So now, have I stolen? Am I infringing on the original copyright of that? Even I don't know, but and I have no way to prove, because I actually own the book. I just was too lazy to read the damn thing.
Yeah. But I was referring to. So that's interesting because when writers look at their references, also, for in certain formats, you uh, writers are asked for a list of material they have referred to or alluded to in some formats. That's one of the most, I think, archaic clauses in some contracts, and some, I mean, it's just in there. Most of them don't do it. um,
I feel like, it should be done, but not for legal purposes, but for artistic purposes. Like, knowing what the person was reading while. Uh, I mean, I just saw this post on ICC ka Instagram. It reminded me of this blog somebody used to run, which was about just photographs of people from cricket reading books. And a majority, I would say half the photographs in the series were people reading books during test matches,
okay.
which firstly is testament to how beautiful a sport cricket is, that
Mhm.
in the middle of a game you can be reading a book,
Mhm.
and you can learn what you read from the book and apply it during the gameplay. So I think from that angle it would be wonderful to be able to know exactly what you were alluding to, what you were reading. Now, when Tarantino steals a scene, is it stealing a scene or is it a homage?
Yeah. So that
uh, huh.
that kind of inspiration infringement dichotomy, if I may call it, is is kind of today's most debated dichotomy. I think in some formats it even replaces the idea expression dichotomy, because how, I mean, if you're saying you're paying homage to the
I'm not allowed to pay homage to Louis C.K. or to George Carlin or any comic. That's not, we don't allow that. No.
yeah. um, yes, but I mean, what I'm talking about is taking your jokes, putting them into formats like memes. I know, I've seen, I think, comedians like Rohan Desai, correct me if I'm wrong, Siddharth Dudeja, their jokes being then represented as memes.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's so the general belief amongst see, the thing is, when it's on Twitter, no, there is recourse, because Twitter is waiting to tear anybody down 24/7.
yeah.
Similarly, Instagram, it's much harder.
Mhm.
So there is, I think, on some level, an unwritten rule which is often exploited, but it's okay. But there's an unwritten rule of, if I was taking my joke, attach my face to it.
Mhm.
Or if you're taking a video, ask me and take a video.
Yeah.
But of course, most people don't care. But when they do, they try to, at least if they're using my face. So my face is attached to it. I take it as a marketing cost.
Mhm.
Because honestly, a lot of the content I create is not intended to make any revenue for me.
Mhm.
In my accounts, it will go in as advertising cost, and it is, because that's, maintaining an Instagram profile. It's My job is comedy. I tell jokes for a living.
Mhm.
Instagram is not how I make my money. It's side income at best, and it's so I don't mind proliferation of my brand on this thing. No, one thing that I find which is interesting that comedians are not doing yet is registering their brands.
Yeah. So that's something that I mean that we've discussed in the past. I think that's something that, I mean, even punchlines to an extent, right? An example of that in music would be, for example, the title of the track Kolavari D, right? Or um, correct me if I'm wrong again. If um, the track was called something else. I believe the track was called something else, and I think the most popular lyrics from the song were Kolavari D, and then therefore they went out and trademarked um,
Hmm.
that hook line or those words Kolavari D. And I think um, I think comedians haven't explored or haven't reached that phase of going out and identifying really some of. I mean, I've seen this being done for television to an extent where it's almost reached the stage of emojis and protected in kind of those formats. I wouldn't know if revenue has accrued from all those investments, but I can say this: it really has contributed to the brand being built and a lot of attention translating into and converting into a lot of inquiries for and bookings for those artist comedians. I think one example of those is Kapil Sharma's and that whole segment of Babaji Ka,
Tullu.
yeah, and that then going out and being, I mean, expressed in the form of, um, and I don't know if it makes sense, but the way that was seen through from maybe script to stage, in the way it was acted out and performed, to how it's gone down the line. And now I see, even I was playing Ludo with my friends online the other day, and one of the emojis you could use in the game was that action. So that's the space I'm coming from. I'm not
Like,
sure.
yeah, but it's just such a again, it's just so difficult to track. It's
Yeah.
just so difficult to track these things.
Hmm.
That's one of the reasons why I think merchandising is really not something that comedians have been interested in, because we
Yet.
know how many knockoffs will be made so quickly,
I mean,
and how difficult it is to constantly keep track of that. Now,
mhm,
do we have enough money to give it to a third party to execute our merchandising needs? Yeah, we've reached that stage. Numbers are that big
mhm,
for some people. Like, I mean, for me, for example, there is enough revenue for me to tell a company, okay, you make me t-shirts and I'll sell them on my whatever.
yeah.
Some people have reached an even bigger stage. Kenny sells planners, man. But the problem is to make sure that, I mean, on an intellectual property level, this just doesn't seem to be much defense unless you have a a big manager behind you, or a big some sort of. And again, it seems capital intensive. Now most of these people, comedians, are not very big on financial security, because we don't have it at all. And something that feels like a cost is always going to be cut first.
Mhm. So I'm going to ask one last question before I move to a question from the audience.
Hmm.
Um, when at what point do you? So I've understood so far. I will summarize as I go on, as I have been doing. For this particular uh, part, you I think you've not leaned on um, the traditional IP enforcement system, the judiciary and the executive, to really enforce or protect your intellectual property. Um, but um, and as I've understood, it's norms enforced, community enforced. In some cases, um, I can't really say it's architecture enforced, but I think to your last point, Akash, um, market enforced would be the answer to your question. Just as kind of streaming.
Market enforce is not happening.
Okay.
That is not happening. End consumer doesn't care. You
Mhm.
know, Amy Schumer could be accused of stealing jokes from 100 different people, and
I'm
it
talking
doesn't.
about the merchandise part when I say market
Oh
enforced.
yeah, okay, yeah, for sure.
Market. I mean, you bundle a T-shirt along with a ticket to your next show. They're going to buy that ticket and not look to buy a cheaper ticket and a cheaper T-shirt.
Yeah.
So um, that's one example, and that's how I'd like to summarize that. But I think I still do believe at a certain point when the game or when the upside is much larger. For example, when a TV show or a network uh, picks up one of your jokes and or an entire bit and puts
Yeah.
it into their segment. I would that be a turning point where you look to this traditional IP system to use, lean on, and enforce your work?
Uh Sorry, could you repeat the last part of that again?
So, in the case of when a traditional media company outside of the stand-up comedy format
Ah,
picks up your jokes and
Now
uses them
the
into.
problem is, in order to make sure that I know what to do when that company comes for my stuff, I need to have had adequate amount of recordings to prove this situation.
Mhm,
And again, we come back to the problem of not wanting to reveal most of what is there on an audio tape.
mhm. So, I mean, take it from me, Akash. The way evidence is kind of is kind of submitted into courts. I think to retrieve or play that evidence is is uh, is not something that infringers or pirates can retrieve very access very easily.
No, it's not about the pirates. Nah, see, that's what I'm trying to say. See, the call me crazy, but I come from the small percentage of comedians who also fears prosecution based on opinions about certain things,
Mm.
or just general mob rage.
So
And that's where I think the concern is for several comedians.
I think that's a brilliant point. That's a brilliant point. It's that fear of the um, inappropriateness, illegality, and political correctness of the subject matter itself that you fear uh, going to the.
Yeah. So I could something, and I mean, oof, man, try explaining to, I don't even know how I would explain to a court, or anyone would explain to a court that my joke about oral sex and pani puri has been stolen, and the
But
validity of it as a piece of art also.
that being said, Akash, I have seen. I mean, we're yet to reach some kind of landmark cases, or we're far from it, but at least some use cases or examples. I have seen a lot of rap songs, um, explicit poems being enforced through courts of law. So not just, I mean,
But what if, nay, now see the fear, I mean, and maybe it is paranoia, but the fear is, I don't want an officer of the court to hear my opinions of the whatever the government, right, expressed right before the oral sex joke.
Mhm.
So it's I mean, and again, saying it's paranoia should indicate how less likely that is. But the mehnat, I guess, and the cost involved in constantly updating that script that you have to keep registering and re-registering. I tour with 5 different hours.
Mhm.
At some nights I do maybe half an hour of what I have talked about. The other half is just whatever's off the top of my head. So then what do you do? How much of it do you register? How constantly do you register? These become problems, you know.
Yeah.
To type out a transcript of a 1 hour show, I've tried, I've done my own shows. You know how many sounds I can't put into, there are no homophones for those sounds.
I get, I get it.
So that I think is the bigger uh,
I think that that made this discussion for me, because that really points questions at the assumptions that the intellectual property system makes, because it's not just the intellectual property system, um, but the subject matter that has to be taken into context, and that's what makes creators wary of going into the traditional intellectual property system to seek recourse or remedy.
yeah, and it's also, I mean, we are at that point where in the same ants wala joke, you know, there was a line about a cow, there was an observation,
Mhm.
uh, which, you know, I had a feeling, oh, I think I know who somebody used to do something like this. So, you know, we're at that point as a community where even if you don't know someone very well, you would call them up and be like, hey, can you listen? I remember you did this joke once. I have this one line which I know for a fact is your line as well, but it leads somewhere else. It comes from somewhere else. Can it be fine? Is it fine? And they'll be more than fine to negotiate or to whatever. Uh, and God, thank God, there's never been conversation of money yet.
Yeah. But okay, so I'm going to quickly, before we end, I'm going to quickly pick up one of the questions that we have from the audience. Um, So Rishabh Chamedia, I don't know if the name rings a bell, Akash, but
Hmm.
he's asking for new age entrants or new age creative creators, how difficult is it to be away from this circle of influence that the kind of the uh, the famous or the comedians who have made it
Yeah,
have, and how, if you're not in that circle, for a small time comedian, how even through this norms enforced practice or practice of enforcing through norms, how easy is it even available to a new entrant comedian?
yeah, man. Comedy is justice.
Mhm.
If you're funny or funny, and you can't be held back for too long.
Mhm.
I've never heard of a comic who killed for 6 months straight or a year straight and didn't move forward career wise.
Mhm.
Where is it difficult? It is difficult because you will not make the effort to be that good.
Okay.
uh, uh, Take it from somebody who's not been in the middle of things and not really been in the right cliques or friends with the right people. The only compromise, rather the only downside, so to speak, is that you have to work harder and you have to innovate more.
Mhm.
To break up, to level up each and every time, you have to do something that is truly revolutionary and truly grants you that much bigger an audience,
Mhm.
as opposed to slowly accruing audience every time, you know, you come in somebody else's video, which is a totally legit way to go about it. But again, you know, to feel like it's not possible without it, I am an example of the fact that it's possible.
Okay. I think there's one more relevant question, and that's going to be the last one I'll take.
Hmm.
Happens to be a friend of mine, Akash. Maybe you recognize him. Shanahan Baptista asks, if you're,
Hey,
if you're part of a comedy collective, how do you ensure a joke is still yours, or is it assumed to be shared property or a property of joint authorship?
yeah, so I have literally just been discussing this with a bunch of my friends last 2 days, because we had okay, so uh, more often than not, when a joke is co-written, it is a very quick, it's second nature to everybody who does this regularly, to establish those things. To give you an example, Abhijit Ganguly got stabbed, okay, in
Mhm.
Delhi. They took him to the hospital. He's going from the some test to some other thing. and he's looking at the comedian saying, "Hey, this is my joke. Nobody's taking this joke." Okay, so we are very very tight about it. It is, and that's where I think communication is paramount. No matter how good you are with someone, you always that basic communication is that, hey मैं ये ले रहा हूँ, I'm taking this, I'm gonna write, oh my god, I'm gonna use this, and you make sure that consent is taken beforehand. So it is not a situation of co-authorship at all. There's at most you get a special thanks at the end, but the fact is whenever you hit a wall with a joke, you've gone to someone and you asked for help. Many a times, when you are in a writing session, which is what happens in collectives. I have never been in one as such, except for the first one way back when I was a kid. But um, the basic rule is jiska premise uska joke. So whoever gets the premise, they take all the jokes that are reaped from that premise, and everybody takes turns to do their premises. It's a very continuing process. There are jokes that I would say are with me to less, but I mean there are jokes of my friends which I must have written on like 80% of that joke, but that's not important. It's the important thing is that it was there. The person found the potential of it being there, and then I got the privilege of sorts to help explore that potential, and it helped me as a comedian as well. So it's
Mhm.
cool.
I'm just saying you would be co-authors or co-writers by definition, in that
Yeah, but
sense. But
I would never enforce that claim in
mm,
any regard, because that understanding, and I think in a sense, we would give away that claim as soon as we consent 100 times, saying yes, yes, this is your joke, you keep it, I don't want it.
okay. But there's no real recording of it. You don't even write an email to each other, saying that this is your joke. You keep it.
Yeah, no, not really, because most of these conversations, if they're amongst only two people, are initiated with a text or a call or something, saying, "Hey, man, I need help with this joke," or if it's in person, there are always what's it called, witnesses, if there are enough people.
And so let's talk about commissioned work or works for hire in this kind of context. I know that some of the biggest um, collectives, comedy collectives, have come out of groups of writers who used to write for bigger comedians, whether they were ghost writers or
Not so. India doesn't have a culture of comedians writing for comedians yet. Uh, if it is there, it is the best kept secret in the world, because I would know, and I don't think that that's happening in India at all. Nobody's writing jokes for each other yet. What we do is, like what I described earlier, like a tagging session or a writing session where people will help each other out. We have comedians writing for properties, writing for film and television, writing for online stuff, and in those places, I, I don't really remember any instance of somebody from within the community plagiarizing anything for film and television. There have been instances of film and television plagiarizing from comedy. Uh, that's an interesting point. Actually, I should call and check up with those people as to where it's gone.
yeah. So on that note, I take this opportunity to kind of summarize, for all our viewers on Zoom, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you for joining us today. And today we were exploring in a session called Jokes Apart. We kind of, Akash took us through the process of creation, where we learned how differently comedians write, as opposed to traditional writers, and how differently they think of their performances, their delivery, and when they take their products or services to market. We've seen that it's very norms enforced, and those norms have, I mean, not just IP norms, but when Akash spoke about how the community of promoters and bookers enforced Me Too or posh oriented norms against some comedians and performers. We've seen that it has got a legitimate value to it, and really you can enforce and protect your IP, and certain core values, codes of conduct, even in this soon to be, I would like to say, Akash industry. And we've also seen that at at a certain point, I mean, many questions are left to be answered, but at least we're having this discussion. We've reached this point where it is a question that you're willing to consider. But at a certain point, I do believe that you will look to the existing IP system to enforce and protect, um, or even to begin with registering. Uh,
I completely agree, and I feel like everything from registering usernames and hashtags and such to jokes and merchandise, which is where I'm glad I have a friend who's pursuing this more seriously than I did
Mhm.
in you. So
Well, that's what I'm going to be doing for 365 days of the year henceforth. So this is again to our viewers celebrating the launch of Tinnuts, our intellectual property, new age intellectual property law firm, um, and we're hoping to inspire others with this kind of non-conventional approach. And on that note, thank you, thanks a ton, Akash. Thank you for
not at all, man.
being a part of this session. And thank you for always being there for me, man. Whenever I need you to go live in 2 days' notice, and I will continue to be there for you whenever you need an answer in 2 minutes also. So,
For sure. Take care, man. Thank you so
all right,
much,
thank
and wish you all the best and all the success.
you.
As
Likewise,
with all your other endeavors.
yes. Likewise, wish you the best as well.
See you.
See you. Thanks.